The term slow clothes was coined by Canadian journalist Angela Murrells in 2004. She based it on the concept of the slow foods movement, which appeared as a reaction against the fast food culture. The slow food movement emphasizes eating local and organic, maintaining traditional regional cuisines, and maintaining the connection between the plate and the planet. There is also a fast clothes culture. We all know it exists, and we know it now more than ever. It is created by the fashion industry that offers consumers constantly changing collections of new clothing at low prices, and this has become the norm. The world now consumes about 80 billion new pieces of clothing every year. This is 400% more than the amount consumed just 20 years ago. In fact, the fashion industry is responsible for more carbon emissions than all the international flights and marine shipping combined. It is the second largest polluter in the world, second only to oil. These relatively new practices of our fashion industry have broken down the connection between cloth and soul. At Maiwa, we believe that making clothes can be slowed down in very particular ways. There are well-known and heartbreaking issues of labor and exploitation. There are many horror stories of working conditions and wages. I would like to focus on a more positive side, what can be done and what we see being done. There is an alternative. Slow clothes are slow because there is human involvement in all aspects of production. We see human involvement not as something to be eliminated in the interests of faster production, but rather we seek to add a human element to all aspects of clothing design and production. It is important to draw out what might be an obvious distinction. Slow clothes are not slow because production is inefficient or lacks planning. Slow clothes are slow because their production is thoughtful and quite simply requires time. For us, slow clothes is asking the question, do we even need to produce another piece of clothing? I believe the answer is yes, but we have to do it differently. Every piece produced must make a difference. A different criteria must be met, and I'm going to explore this in this lecture. You might think that slow clothes would be prohibitively expensive to make, but it's not true. The fact is that mass-produced jeans are inexpensive to make, yet the consumer is willing to pay upwards of $300, $400 a pair, even though in the back of their minds the population knows that the production costs were as little as 5% of the figure seen on the tag. At Maiwa, we know it's possible to make slow clothes because we do it all the time. It is challenging. It requires us to be clever and sharp and smart in a different way than is required of a fast clothes model. And yes, it takes time. But the benefits give us something that the ordinary clothing manufacturer will never have. An intense joy when we succeed, a feeling that we are doing something beyond being successful at a demanding business, a knowledge that we have been successful at making the clothing industry inclusive of artisans, craftspeople, skilled technicians, and farmers, and that we are able to keep them fully employed and maintain their skills. I'd like to take you through some of the aspects of slow clothes so that you can see what we mean. The title of this lecture is Waiting for the Monsoon, Slow Clothes in India, because we work in India and the cycle of the monsoon affects our production in every way, from spinning and weaving to the growing of dyes, from the block printing to the sewing. This is a factory weaving cloth at an astounding pace. We use mill-woven linen from this mill in Kolkata. But more than half of our clothing production uses hand-woven cloth. Some of our hand-woven cloth can take a village up to 1.5 years to weave. It has a life and substance like no other cloth we have ever been able to find. We can get the most gossamer of cottons and over-twisted silk tusses. We can blend organic yarns with the nettles of Nepal. We can take the threads of Assam's wild silks, Aryan Muga, and blend them with Tibetan wool. We can only do this in the hand-spun, hand-woven sector, for a mill would not even consider our requests. We can include artisans from all the places we work, and they can be part of the fashion industry that has traditionally excluded them because of the way industry works to both systems and schedules. These artisans, by the very work that they do and the very remoteness of their communities, have a significant impact on maintaining diversity of fibers, diversity of seeds for fibers, processes for extracting fiber from plants. The village is a village, and it is very different from a factory. It lives and life continues. There are children and the elderly. There are the workers amongst it all. It is very easy to have your children beside you as you weave in your village. The work life and the home life coexists. In the north of India, on the Tibetan border, we work with a group of weavers who spin, weave, and naturally dye our wools and wool mixes such as Tussar silken wool and Eri silken wool. Tussa and Eri are two of the wild silks. We work in Orissa and Andhra Pradesh in central and south India with ikat weavers weaving cottons and silks. We also work in Kutch on the Pakistan border with weavers who weave slightly rough textural local wool. From this we make blankets, shawls, and wonderful coats. The dyes are mostly from indigo for blue, black for burgundy reds, set against the beautiful shine of the natural brown and black wool of the local sheep. Maiwa uses organic cotton in 100% of its clothing and bedding. The footage you are going to see is the organic cotton farm Maiwa buys from. It's near Nagpur in central India, and it is certified by 2 organizations outside of India and requires buyers to start paying for their order at time of planting, so relieving the burden on farmers. This is an organic cotton farm, only 15 acres in size, and yet considered a large farm in India. It supports a village that has finally got out from under the devastating spiral of grueling working conditions, deadly insecticides, mounting debt, leading to a stunning rate of suicides, 200,000 in the cotton industry alone between 2000 and 2008. With the help of organizations like Chetna Organic and BioRay, this village has been able to sustainably switch to organic cotton. Cotton has been grown for millennia around the world and accounts for half of the world's fiber consumption. But modern methods of cotton farming mean that cotton can hardly be called natural anymore. Through hybridization and genetic modification, intensive land management, and the use of chemical pesticides and fertilizers, cotton is one of the most chemically dependent crops in the world. Conventional cotton uses 10% of all agricultural chemicals and 25% of the world's insecticides. In the US, 1/3 of a pound of chemicals is needed just to grow enough conventional cotton for a regular t-shirt. Organic cotton is grown without the use of pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, defoliants, or genetic engineering. Instead of these toxic chemicals, organic farmers use beneficial insects, crop rotation, companion planting or intercropping, compost, and cover crops. They weed by hand or machine in order to build soil quality and enhance biodiversity. Many believe that conventional cotton uses much less water than organic cotton, but in fact, the opposite is true. By beginning with healthy soil, organic cotton farmers do not need to supply intense irrigation for their crops. The plants themselves use water much more efficiently due to the inherent health of their surrounding environment. There is less and less reason for buying conventional cotton. The accounts just don't add up. Conventional cotton prices do not reflect the hidden costs we pay, including billions of dollars in subsidies, pesticide regulation, hazardous waste disposal, and overall damage to the environment and workers' health, from farmers to spinners to weavers, not to mention consumers. The difference in price between conventional and organic cotton, or any organic fiber for that matter, would be insignificant if subsidies were removed and proper bottom line accounting was practiced. This is an indigo farm in South India where we get all our natural indigo, all our blue color. As clothing designers and producers, we are very affected by the conditions of the farmers who cultivate our natural colors. We are brought into their weather and land issues and must constantly adjust our dye recipes with each crop. These two bullocks are hauling 200 kilos of indigo leaves, which, when extracted, will produce 1 kilo of indigo extract powder. The leaves are soaked in water overnight to create the fermentation that separates the indigo white, or indoxyl, and allows the precursor to go into solution. Leaves are removed and oxygen is added into the water through beating. This turns the indigo white into indigo blue and makes it insoluble. The water is drained off and the indigo is collected, boiled, and pressed into cakes. At this stage, it is ready to be ground and used in what we know as many types of indigo vats to dye cloth blue. Maiwa uses natural dyes in 90% of its clothing and 100% of its bedding. There is an incredible connection between natural dyes and history, geography, culture, science, and ecology. In a world saturated by synthetic color, it is imperative that natural dyes remain economically viable.
Dig around and then remove. That is what's happening. I should define, this is. Yeah, this is good.
We cannot dye everything in our world with natural dyes. Our need for color is too great. But natural dyes do not have to disappear. All that knowledge of plants and water and land, of extracting colors from nature, that knowledge and skill must remain as a vibrant alternative. There is a connection between natural dyes and their source that simply does not exist with synthetic colors. At Maiwa, we work with block printers in various parts of India, from the Kutch Desert bordering Pakistan to Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Andhra Pradesh in the south. All our surface design of printing comes from block printing with natural dyes, all done on organic cotton, linen, or silk. This process can be simple and serene or highly complex, with patterns taking up to 15 passes of the cloth under the block and through the dye bath. Block printers are constantly designing, putting repeats together, innovating, and we keep pushing the benchmark. This keeps people highly skilled. It is interesting to note that while we are talking artisan, the single Maiwa store on Granville Island in Vancouver and our online presence supports the natural dye block printing per year of 30,000 meters in the Kutch Desert, 35,000 meters in Rajasthan, and 10,000 meters in South India. Maiwa also supports the hand weaving of over 30,000 meters in various parts of India, from Bengal to Himachal to Tamil. 100% of this fabric is certified organic, locally produced, and has such value added that rather than getting the standard $1.05 for a meter of conventional cotton and $1.50 for a meter of silkscreen cotton, for instance, these artisan producers are getting $4.85 for the organic cotton and $8.95 per meter when it is block printed with natural dyes. Ajrakh is one of the traditional block-printed textiles of India. Here in the middle is Dr. Ismailbhai Khetri, a traditional Ajrakh printer whom we have known and worked with for almost 30 years. Ismailbhai and his extended family live in Kutch. They block print all our Ajrakh fabric. All the beautiful leather bags that Maiwa sells are made by the artisans in this next amazing village of Jawaja in Rajasthan. We have worked with these artisans for over 20 years now. We have worked slowly to help them build their excellence, and they work slowly to produce. In the Kutch Desert, on the border between India and Pakistan, Maiwa works with 7 different tribes, all of whom have their very own distinct style of embroidery, each a stitch language in and of itself. We are most interested in the process of creation and production. in the origin and history of a fiber, of a fabric, a process, a stitch. We are interested in the connection of cultures and people to trade, and to textiles' ability to communicate simple beauty, intrinsic original qualities, textiles and clothing that make you want to touch them, to know who has made them, who has woven the cloth, created the colors. We are interested in making beautiful things rather than instantly recognizable labels. We are extremely interested in creating a connection between the maker and the wearer. We collaborate with artisans who are actively involved in our clothing and bedding production. They are active from their particular process, perhaps embroidery, right through to the costing and selling. We collaborate on exhibitions, writing books, films. We also bring artisans to the West so that they can see where their work goes, who buys it, better understand their market. Many of you may have met them here in Vancouver. The next short film documents one of our newer projects, the Banjara project. It is newer in that it is only 12 years old, and only in the last 5 years have we had products come to Canada. The Banjara live throughout India, and they have inherited a rich folk tradition of embroidery. Their distinct patterns and stitches are powerful and instantly recognizable, almost unlike any other group. The Banjara's innate design sense fits easily into a contemporary design aesthetic, with its bold presentation and its sense of symmetry and play. In modern marketing parlance, there is an established, well-defined brand with considerable cachet. And yet, to turn this cultural capital into a livelihood for skilled artisans is no simple matter. To establish a successful embroidery revival requires more than determination, hard work, and skill. It requires business savvy, an understanding of local and global markets, and the ability to motivate people to do the very best work that they are capable of. And beyond all this, it requires a vision of skilled craft that can carry the distinct cultural identity of the group into the future. This group has gone from 4 women to 20 to 45 and then 85, and now there are 120 members. In the clip is a poster of the first Banjara exhibition we held in 2012 in Vancouver, and a photo of the cover of the book published by Thames and Hudson on the Banjara that my husband Tim and I wrote. At the end of the clip, you will see the second exhibition of the work of the Banjara, held at the Monty Clark Gallery in Vancouver. And then you will see an amazing road trip we did in November 2016. 6 staff joined Tim and I on a 6,500-kilometer road trip through India to give a copy of the book back to all the women who had helped make this revival and this book possible. In the south of India, in the Munnar Hills, deep in the tea plantations, we work with a group of natural dyers who use tea waste to dye silks and organic cottons. After working with them for some time now, we are able to give them our patterns of garments, and they can design the fabric using their wealth of skill with tying and binding, batik, block printing, and natural dyeing. They have had some challenges with light fastness, and on one of our trips we took our master dyer Mahesh from Rajasthan and our Indigo farmer Pichi Reddy, plus 2 of our Vancouver Maiwa staff to help troubleshoot some of their issues. We didn't just walk away and say, sorry, your dyes are fading and this is not acceptable to us. Instead, we said your dyes are fading and I think we know some experts who can help you with that. They found this very different. In our rapidly cycling fashion industry, we are losing the human touches, and we are most interested in putting the human touch back into every garment, into the fabric, the colors, the stitching, the details. We feel very responsible for the people involved in every step and are often drawn into their issues. We work very collaboratively and feel deeply that we must all come up together. Now we have arrived at the Maiwa studio in Rajasthan. This is where we began clothing production in India in 2003 and began trying to work with the idea of bringing together a whole diverse group of textile artisans who work independently in their villages and try having them work collaboratively on lines of clothing. They work from great distances, but in constant communication. At first, we tried a pretty traditional industrial model of clothing production based on garment dyeing. That is, making garments and dyeing in the garment stage. This did not work, for the natural dyes would not go into the seams. And then we tried piece dyeing or fabric dyeing. But because we work with fabrics other than just cottons, we work with linens, hemps, wools, and heavy silks, alternative fabrics and fibers that tend to be heavy when wet. The dyers could only work with 3 to 5 meter pieces rather than 25 to 30 meter pieces. So we ended up with a process of cutting each piece of fabric for each garment and working this way. An organizational challenge, to say the least. But we sorted it. These are some of the natural dye plants, mordants, resists, gums, and muds that we work with to dye and print our fabrics. Natural dyes using only alum and tannin as fixatives are the safest and most sustainable of all the dyes. We use copper and iron pots for dyeing. Copper brightens some of the dyes, and iron mutes some. Our indigo vats are 10 feet deep, and they are built just after monsoon in August, and they are active until the next monsoon begins the following July.
इंडिगो का कहाँ है?
At Maiwa, we seem at times to be on a mission of promoting the so-called imperfect, rather like having to explain organic apples with their inherent spots or various sizes. Unlike processed foods, organic foods have an identity. You know that they've been grown on a farm. They haven't been overly designed or controlled or modified. There is a beauty to the imperfections. We are always trying to help people understand the beauty of handspun and handwoven, the inherent slubs and variegations of fabric that give it life and beauty. The colors that come from using plant dyes, colors that are not perfectly even, but shift across the fabric with subtle shades, and God forbid fades with age, and fades beautifully, and gives the fabric sophistication. Clothing is fundamental. The basic needs of food, shelter, and clothing have remained unaltered throughout time. What has changed is the vast amount of marketing power that has transformed these basic needs into excessive demands. Lee Adelcourt of Trend Union says in her book Anti-Fashion Manifesto, "Low prices are enslaving workers and destroying cultural value. The manufacturing of clothes has gone through a rapid and sordid restructuring process, which has seen production leave the Western world to profit from and exploit low-income countries. How can we now have disposable clothing where a cotton dress costs $10? How can a product that needs to be planted, grown, harvested, combed, spun, knitted, cut, and stitched, finished, printed, labeled, packaged, and transported cost less than a sandwich?" she asks. On the hunt for cheaper deals, volume companies, but also some luxury brands, have trusted the making of their garments to underpaid workers living in dire conditions, she continues. What's more, these prices imply the clothes are to be thrown away, discarded before being loved and savored, teaching young consumers now that fashion has no value. I do believe the clothing industry can make great changes for good, but it will take the demand of the buying public. That's how it works. It has the power to have great positive effect on the environment in its solid support of organic textiles and natural dyes. The clothing industry has the power to affect employment by including skilled communities rather than always moving towards the offshore second and third party factory model. It can positively affect farming in the way it can be inclusive if it remains diversified, in supporting alternate fibers, alternate sources of natural color. What gets me is that there is this idea or the illusion of so much diversity in fashion, and yet the reality is there is less and less room for inclusion of the very artisans and small producers that could make it diverse and would most benefit from being part of clothing production. It is, however, the consumer who has the ultimate power for good by buying better. We are in a constant dialogue to remain creative and responsive in our production methods, to be able to work with hundreds of weavers, so many natural dyes, fibers, and so many types of fabrics. An interesting point, in all, we work with, on average, 1,200 embroiderers, 400 weavers, 100 block printers, 100 natural dyers, 20 sewers, in full-time employment, just one small company with a retail shop and an online store. We want to keep the pleasure of clothing. We want to be evocative and sensual, but most of all, we want it to be true, to speak with the voice of the cultures that have inspired it and collaborated to bring it to life. Much like the slow food revolution, we need a slow clothes revolution, a greater understanding of the real cost of clothing and an appreciation of its value. The eco message is buy less, buy better. Buy less by making the most of what we have, borrow and recycle clothing. In the last decade, as the price of clothing has fallen, we have doubled the size of our wardrobes, not to mention our closets, and not reduced the actual amount of spending on clothing. The defense of overproduction to create more affordable clothing just does not stick. Buy better by choosing fairly traded clothes, clothing from natural fibres and pesticide-free fabrics, natural dyed textiles, artisan and handcrafted details. Slow clothes by buying proactively and thoughtfully. We're sending the message that current exploitative practices is simply unacceptable and that we're prepared to put our money where our mouth is and support the positive alternatives. A slow clothes movement can mean buying locally, making our own clothing, buying less, buying clothes that last and remain classic, buying clothes that include all communities. Professor Barry Schwartz of Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania, and author of The Paradox of Choice, Why More is Less, said in an interview, "Fashion has always been wasteful, and now we just waste faster. All this massive quantity of choice and product is a triumph of marketing, not necessarily a triumph of aesthetics." The slow clothes movement gives us the opportunity to explore a language other than one of commerce, other than one that is engineered to describe the bottom line, the purpose of something. Since someone makes money each time we buy a pair of jeans, there is a whole language around getting us to buy more jeans. The language is a language of persuasion, of commerce, and has actually little to do with clothing as an expression of who we are. But there is an increasingly lost language of subtleties, pleasures, associations, meanings of the handcrafted, hand-detailed, plant-dyed, the handwoven, the human experience of clothing the body. Rebecca Solnit writes in her book, A Field Guide to Getting Lost, "Ultimately, I believe that slowness is an act of resistance, not because slowness is good in and itself, but because of all it makes room for, the things that don't get measured and can't be bought. At Maiwa, we see slow clothes as a movement of making room in the clothing industry for the human endeavor of creativity, of clothing with ethical and social significance, clothing with subtle details that infuse a cloth with meaning, clothing enriched by handcrafted details, clothing with soul.